but I am I am a scientist in the evidence and analysis team within the pesticides group. So we commission research and we provide evidence to the policy guys to design their policy. So I'm going to give an update on some of the research that we've been commissioning over the last few years. So firstly, I'm going to touch on the NAP and some of the actions within it that sort of relate to the projects that we're doing. I'm going to mention a horizon scanning project that we've done really recently, looking at key issues that are going to be coming up, some of the IPM projects that we've run, and then I'm going to talk about what we're doing on pesticide resistance and biopesticides. So, National Action Plan for the Sustainable Use of Pesticides was finally published in May this year, and it had 3 key objectives. So, 1, to encourage uptake of IPM. The second objective, to set clear targets and measures to monitor the use of pesticides. And objective 3, to strengthen compliance to ensure safety and better environmental outcomes. Then within there's 10 actions under objective 1, increasing uptake of IPM. And these are I'm just going to touch on in some of the projects that we've been doing. Am I really echoey? I'm going to stand a bit further back. So action 1 is to increase awareness and knowledge of IPM strategies through the promotion of decision support and planning tools, practical guidance and access to learning and evidence from R&D. Action 7 is to develop an internal evidence-based horizon scanning capability to identify, understand and mitigate pest control gaps. Action 9 is considering how we can make improvements to the arrangements for GB biopesticides. And then action 10 is to continue to direct funding to facilitate applied R&D, which is what you do in this room, on priority areas where alternatives to conventional chemical pesticides are lacking, particularly in major crops. So horizon scanning. Recently, we did an internal project using the Delphi method. If you don't know what the Delphi method is, we basically got a lot of expert panelists, some of you may probably be in the room, and we got them to put in novel and emerging issues that may have a high impact on the control of agricultural pest and diseases in the UK over the next 5 to 30 years. So the way a Delphi study works is all of those experts put in 1 to 2 issues. Then this is all via email rather than sort of in a workshop. Then they all got scored as to which they thought was priority, and then another round, and then there were sort of 16 key themes at the end, key projects at the end. And the key themes were, number 1, biopesticides and biological control, including sort of lack of uptake potentially. Second was pesticide resistance. Third was technological innovation and precision tools. And 4 was climate change and invasive species. So this is a really recent study, and comfortingly, none of the issues were a surprise to us, which means we at least know of these issues already, and some of them we're working on already, and then we can focus funding on those we aren't doing later on. So in terms of IPM projects, I'm going to be speaking about lots of projects which people in the room are running, so credit to them. So this is a project by ADAS. The recently retired Neil Paverley and Frank van der Bosch put these together. So this is really to create, this is particularly on disease, so integrated disease management. And we created a series of lectures going through some of the theory to practice. So there's scientific literature, which is pretty inaccessible for farmers. There's sort of more basic resources about, what is IPM and IPM strategies. And this is supposed to bridge the gap between the two. So this series focuses on disease control in cereals, and it offers expert advice on the biology of the systems about which the decisions are made. So these are on YouTube, and I think there's a series of 14, so please do take a look. Someone's trying to get in. Then we are also continuing the funding of the IPM Decisions platform and IPM Works. So these are 2 websites that were created through a Horizon Europe program across Europe. This funding is now finished, but we think these websites are really valuable, so we're continuing funding of these. So the IPM Decisions platform is decision support systems, basically. So farmers or agronomists can put in what crops they're interested in, where they are, and they can look at models which will help them make decisions about whether to spray, when to spray, etc. And then IPM Works is more of a resource, basically. So there's lots of different, again, you can search by where you are, what crop you're dealing with, what pest disease you're dealing with, and there's lots of resources and documents to help you, suggest IPM strategies. The next project, again with ADAS, this was IPM-Net. So this was trying to lead on from the YENs, the yield enhancement networks. Obviously, these were set up to enhance yield. Okay, give you a little break there in between. Now we'll carry on. So we're going to go on to what we're doing on pesticide resistance. We commissioned ADAS to do a review last year on giving a review of resistance of pests, weeds and pathogens to conventional pesticides. So this was to investigate and survey those in the resistance action groups, BCPC, and farmers on their views and knowledge on pesticide resistance, as well as providing case studies of resistance in different sectors. So the RAGs are composed of researchers, industry, policy and regulators, and they're a vehicle for participants to update on cases of resistance. Obviously, due to commercial sensitivity of agrochemical company data, it means it's not often shared openly and therefore doesn't necessarily reach the regulators or the farmers and the agronomists. So sometimes farmers are paying for and using pesticides which are no longer effective, meaning they're spending money when unnecessary, they're suffering from more crop damage than expected, and they're having an unnecessary load on the environment, which nobody wants. So the recommendations from the review were that most resistance researchers, who good cells, work at the discipline level. However, the farmer needs information at the crop level. They're simultaneously trying to manage pests, weeds and diseases, and they can get conflicting messages from different disciplines. So the recommendation was to obtain independent, openly available resistance data across the country. To enhance communication through the RAGs, they're also voluntary, so they're giving some funding to disseminate the information a bit wider, and to also horizon scan and research emerging threats. Also, one of the aims is to secure long-term funding for a robust resistance monitoring scheme. This varies across the different disciplines, but having a long-term plan would be beneficial. So this financial year, we're doing 3 different projects on resistance. So firstly, we're getting ADAS to design a long-term scheme across herbicides, fungicides and insecticides. We're doing a pilot year of the insecticide resistance scheme, and we're also running resistance and IPM roadshows for the HGB over this winter to highlight the resistance issue and mitigations for farmers and agronomists. So for the design of a long-term study, the idea was to prioritise what targets to monitor, so identify the priority pests, weeds and diseases within defined crop systems, develop a sustainable framework, so create guidelines for sampling, lab and data analytics and data management to ensure evidence-based framework, and also to support decision-making, so engage with stakeholders for added value approach to monitoring framework, information dissemination and best practice. So the work packages kind of correspond to these. So work package 1 was to try and prioritise which targets to monitor by indication and crop, then to devise sampling strategies and guidelines, then to identify lab capacity, testing methods and data handling procedures, to investigate long-term funding and collaboration partnerships, and then to define a dissemination route for best practice approach and project management. So this project is ongoing. The expected project outcomes are for a proposal for a resistance monitoring programme and dissemination approach in line with resistance management guidelines and IPM principles. They also want to give us a summary of the key pest, weed and disease targets by crop for a pesticide resistance monitoring programme. Provide sampling analysis guidelines, identifying opportunities for added value and increased return on investment. A project schematic to outline core activities essential for the successful delivery of a pesticide resistance monitoring programme. And then finally, a communication and dissemination strategy supported by the RAGs and similar interested parties. Then on insecticide resistance monitoring, the aim is to improve knowledge of insecticide resistance of selective invertebrate pests to allow for better management and use of insecticides. So again, similarly, the objectives are to identify the key crop pests, do a scoping network of industry and academic partners for the sampling and the testing, and identify and communicate resistance patterns and emerging risks. These are the target species for this year. It was quite a hard ask for ADAS to collect all these species within this year, but they've done a really good job. And also the current legislative bid is one that there was reports of control failures, so they've added this on as a fifth species. These are the most recent populations that they've collected so far, so you can see how many populations they've got in different areas, and they're going to be testing all these populations. Then finally, the HGB roadshows. The Resistance Roadshow aims to equip farmers with the knowledge, tools and confidence to manage pest, weed and disease resistance effectively across their whole farm business. There are 8 events in total, I think. The first one is next Wednesday. So within each day, there'll be a first session which has farmer-facing first principles of resistance. Then there'll be a pest, weed and disease session. And then afterwards, there'll be a workshop with resistance real-world scenarios, asking farmers, what would you do in this case and why? So then finally, bio-pesticides. So in the NAP in 2025, we set a target of a reduction in pesticide load of 10% across all the PLIs, that's pesticide load indicator metrics, by 2030. So to achieve this, growers need to use less of more toxic pesticides. How can they do this? With precision application, with alternative control methods, and replacing them with less harmful pesticides. So we recognise the important role of biopesticides in achieving this target, and we want more biopesticide uptake by growers. So NAP Action 8 was to continue to provide additional support to biopesticide applications. Many biopesticide manufacturers are small or micro companies. They can find the regulatory regime expensive, time-consuming, and difficult to navigate. And to address this, in 2006, HSE introduced the biopesticide scheme. So this scheme includes capped fees for biopesticide approvals, free pre-submission advice, and a dedicated HSE biopesticide champion. Then on NAP Action 9, this is the one I mentioned at the beginning, consider how we can make improvements to the arrangements for GB biopesticides. So biopesticides are really diverse. It can be difficult to know what data are necessary to show that they're safe and to show that they're efficacious. New studies don't need to be commissioned if existing literature can be used. And small companies sometimes don't think about the regulatory requirements until later in the development process. So we have set up the BIRCH Network, or Bio-pesticides Innovation Research. This started in September this year, so only a couple of months ago, and UK CEH are leading on this. So the idea is to create a network of all interested stakeholders, so researchers, industry, policy, and regulators. And then from this network, we're going to create 2 working groups to write 2 evidence reviews in this year. And then we'll prioritise lists of further possible evidence reviews for future years. And for this project, we're also utilising the advice of the HSE's Biopesticides Cloud, which is an offshoot of the Expert Committee on Pesticides. So evidence review 1 is going to look at what is the nature and authorisation status of 1, approved biopesticides, 2, biopesticides in the authorisation process in Europe and the UK, and 3, future technologies. So for the first one, we're going to use the CABI Bioprotection Portal, which has a list of all the biopesticides that are available in different countries. For what new biopesticide active ingredients are in development, they're going to do a search of the academic literature, and then they'll do a narrative report on the state of development and future perspective for different biopesticide classes. And the evidence review 2 will be on horizon scanning, but that's still in development. So finally, this is a slight departure. Just wanted to mention this while I've got the floor and plenty of time. We also work with UKCH using their honey samples to look at pesticides. So the National Honey Monitoring Scheme is aiming to use honeybees to monitor long-term changes in the condition and health of the countryside. They work with over 4,000 beekeepers in the UK. It's been running since 2018. So honeybees forage across large areas, and they can do meta-barcoding of the honey and pollen samples to identify the DNA of plant species in the landscape. And they have a large archive of these honey samples. So I realise that it's really confusing having birch and beech. We're going with a tree theme here. So this is beech. This is AI's best idea for the acronym. Biomonitoring environmental exposures of chemicals using honeybees. These have been assessed annually from 2019 to 2023, but we're working into 2024 samples now. So annually, they've been collecting 100 honey samples, 40 samples from May, 40 samples from August in arable agriculture, and then 10 samples from urban and 10 samples from what's called semi-natural as well for comparison. We can now quantify 135 pesticides using liquid chromatography and mass spectrometry. So we're looking at insecticides, fungicides, and herbicides, and it includes current and banned PPPs. So this is just a couple of plots. These are the general trends. So on average, they find 5 active ingredients in each honey sample, and there was over 15 reported in one sample. There's been 70 pesticides reported, 18 insecticides. 85% of the samples included taufourthalamate, and 44% included clothianidin. So it's really a good measure to see what levels we're finding in different areas of the country, in different land uses, and also how that's changing over time. So how it's reducing after pesticides are banned, etc. So in summary, we've been focusing our funding on IPM resources, resistance monitoring, and biopesticides. We've got a strong focus on resources that are farmer-focused and accessible, and will be horizon scanning for future crop protection issues and directing funding accordingly. Thank you. It's not letting me check. I'll just let you get on with that.